Welcome everyone to our third and our final webinar today in what's made up our joint collaborative LUPC and SUPC responsible procurement event. If you're joining us for the first time today, the previous sessions have been recorded and will be on our website soon, and this one will also be recorded. So this session will be delivered by our very own responsible procurement lead practitioners. For LUPC, that's Marisol Bernal, and for SUPC, it's Jayne Thorn. As before, if you have any questions throughout the presentations, please use the Q&A facility at the bottom of your screen and we'll address them towards the end of the session. When we started planning this event, the main focus was to ensure that whatever we shared with you should be useful and practical, and that the content would enable you to take away key actions to make change in your own organisations. I hope you'd agree that the first two presentations have absolutely ticked those boxes. So as the icing on the cake, Jayne and Marisol are now going to provide for you a short update on what we've been doing in our own organisations, and then explain a few resources that are available to you to start using today. So it's over to you, Marisol.
Thanks, Emma. Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us in this session. I am Marisol Bernal, Category Manager for Responsible Procurement at LUPC, and I'm going to have this session with Jayne Thorn, Corporate and Professional Services and Responsible Procurement at SUPC. We're going to talk about our current responsible procurement activity and show you some tools we have delivered during this year. I'm going to start with LUPC updates. So we have a new responsible procurement policy. We updated our policy and we're in the process on updating our responsible procurement strategy as well. We hope to do that at the end of this year. This will gonna include some projects that we are gonna work in the next few years. You're gonna see that I include all the links in the presentation, so it's easy for you to get access to those documents in case you want to check something out. We have updated our website as well, and we have a responsible procurement section on the website. We create this to make easier access for members to our resources, our work, and to check out the support that we can give you in this area. One of those areas is the case studies and article, which is called LUPC in Action in our website. And we have the two latest articles that we did on ceremonial gowns and PPE supply chain. We look into our due diligence and what suppliers are doing in the supply chain. Our idea with those articles is for members to use them as a starting point for their own due diligence and conversation with their suppliers. So we mentioned the suppliers in there. We try to be as much transparent as we can, and we gave all the most of the details of their responses on the assessment we did with them. We hope that this is useful for you. We hope to repeat this exercise with the same supplier, doing a follow-up, and with other areas. But I hope you can start using that and do your own due diligence in your own supply chain. Another area we're working is Electronics Watch. I know, well, LUPC members are affiliates and some of the SUPC are affiliates as well, so I'm not going to talk too much, but just so you know, we have our as well direct links from our website to Electronics Watch website. We try to keep that up to date. We have the link for the annual submit that is at the end of this month, so you can have the most relevant information on our website as well. This is we have another document that I'm going to show later that we've been working, but this is for now our updates. So I'll pass to Jayne so she can give an update from SUPC.
Thanks, Marisol. Hi, if you don't know me, I'm Jayne Thorn. I'm the category manager primarily for corporate and professional services at SUPC, and I also have responsibility for responsible procurement. So a brief update from SUPC and what we've been up to. We've recently had a website relaunch, and we have got our responsible procurement section on the new website, and that's more easily accessible. And over the coming weeks and months, you'll see new documents arriving there and new tools for you to use to help you within your responsible procurement journey. So if you haven't been to our new website, go and check that out and have a look at the responsible procurement section and familiarise yourself with that, because that's where you'll see updates coming through. They'll also come through in news stories as they always have before. So keep an eye out for those and keep an eye out for the member updates. We've been working with LUPC, with Marisol, on the new responsible procurement assessment tool, which I'll be coming back to you later for you to have a look at that. And it's a document that you can use at the start of your tender process. As part of that, we're doing a full review of the SUPC procurement processes and how we run our tenders to ensure that we are embedding responsible procurement right at the very start, and to make sure that every process we undertake, we've taken consideration of the environmental, economic and social value needs of those frameworks, as well as making them more inclusive and more diverse, and looking at the supply chain as a whole, and make sure we're not excluding any sectors of the market, whether that's minority owned businesses or SMEs or micro enterprises, so making those more available to the rest of the public sector. And Taryn and Danny have been working on the sector PPE needs. So as a result of COVID, we saw a massive spike in the need for PPE, and Danny went along and worked with the NHS procurement project for a while, scoping out PPE. And on the back of that, we've been working with our members for their PPE needs going forwards. And initially it was just fulfilling needs, but now it's become more environmentally conscious of the materials that we're using and where we're sourcing them from. So Taryn's doing a lot of work in that space to make sure that the goods that we're buying aren't, you know, disposable and have to go to, thoroughly disposable and have to go to landfill. So we're looking at the impact of where they go and what happens to them. And he's also looking from a diversity perspective at face masks that have that clear bit, so that people with auditory needs and who are deaf or lip readers are more able to work with their colleagues. But at the moment, the ones that Taryn's found are single use only because they're of surgical quality. So he's looking into more environmentally friendly and more environmentally conscious versions of those. So if you keep looking at our member updates, you'll get some updates from Taryn on what he's been doing there. So that's where we are at the moment. So I'm going to hand back to Marisol, and she's going to talk about a question set that we've worked together to produce for you and for us to work at your tenders and your call-offs. So Marisol, I'll hand back to you.
Thanks, Jayne. So one of the documents is the Sustainable Development Goals tender and call-off questions. The Sustainable Development Goals are, if you're not aware, 17 goals adopted by all United Nations members states in 2015, and it's a call for action to end poverty, protect the planet, and ensure peace and prosperity by 2030. There is links as well for the documents and SDGs. So this document was developed by SUPC, LUPC, Northeast and Northwest, and it's a set of questions that can be used at framework or call-off level to explore suppliers' commitments in accordance with the SDGs. This document allows suppliers to report on what they have achieved and what they're committing to do in the future. We also align the SDGs with the National Teams Outcomes and Measure TOMS Social Value Framework. And there is a link there if you want to download the TOMS. And the TOMS are some measures, and they have some numbers for each measure. So we align those SDGs with those measures. I'm going to show you an example of the things that you can include you can see in the document. So there's 2 goals. So you can see gender equality from one side, and there's a brief explanation of what the goal is and the questions that we have in there, the category that you can use it. So in this case, it says all, but in the other goal, you can see estates or catering, and when can you use it, or when is better to use it. In both examples say any, but there you'll see in others that say call off or tender. And at the bottom, you'll see the social value TOMS that it aligned with the SDGs. So there's a link as well for that set of questions. It's in both our websites, so you can get all the SDGs and questions in there. If you have any, if you need any help, or you think we missed some questions that you want to include in there, you can email any of us and we will do it. We are working at the moment to do the second step of the document, which is what good looks like. So to help procurement professionals to assess suppliers' response and to see what is the minimum standard the answer should have, to see if there is a good answer or not from a supplier's perspective. So we hope to have that as well in the website soon. So that's about that document, and Jayne is going to talk about the other document that we have. So.
Thanks for that, Marisol. That's something that we worked on together with Northeast and Northwest. So that's something that's going to roll out through the sector, and it's really exciting to have that document already at its second stage, given it was only launched back in the summer. So the document that I've been working on is a new document for SUPC, and it replaces the LUPC SPUC document, and it's a shared document looking at risk during your procurement strategy stage. So it identifies the risks that we're all familiar with around social impacts, economic impacts, and environmental impacts. And it looks at positive and negative impacts as to whether they're to be highlighted or mitigated at whatever stage of the process it is. So if we look at negative impacts, it looks at the mitigation measures we could ask our suppliers to put in place. And if we're making positive impacts, it's how can we increase that positive impact and maybe think about telling a story once we've done that. So going forwards, it will be used by the consortia, and as members you will also have access to that document, and you should also going forwards have access to where it's been used by the consortia, so you can use it at call-off stage as a follow-on. So I'm going to show you the document so you can see what it looks like. So Marisol's going to jump to the next slide for me because she's in control today. So this is the environmental impacts. So it's got a question. So whether it's got a question on impact, and it will tell you the stage, so where you could use that question, so whether it's at ITT, whether it's at KPI stage, or whether it's at SQ stage. And it looks at the risk, whether it's a long-term risk or short-term risk, and it gives that a traffic light colour. And it also gives whether the risk is high or low, and it also gives that a traffic light colour. So where we've got negative impacts, we've got two actions coming from that. So we've got mandatory actions, which sets the bare minimum of what we expect our suppliers to do. And when we set that mandatory level and we determine what that's going to be, we can feed back or look back at our SDG questions and see if there's a question that relates to that, and then decide and pick from that SDG document what that minimum standard is we expect those suppliers to perform to. We can then set a target going forwards to determine how we expect our suppliers to progress and what steps we expect them to make during the lifetime of a framework or a call-off to further mitigate those negative impacts. So if we've used ITT and we've set a minimum mandatory status and standard for our suppliers to be at, it might be something that you want to carry forwards into your KPIs, or ask another deeper and more important question for yourselves at call-off level, if that's something that's particularly important to your institution. Now, where we've got positive impacts and we know that the supplier is doing something positive, we can again ask those questions at any level. And it also asks for the benefit, whether it's long-term or short-term, and whether the benefit is low or high. And then there's actions that we can ask our suppliers that they must do with that. So if they're looking to employ people who are long-term unemployed, we can ask them to look at what percentage they're employing and perhaps ask them to increase that. We could ask them to provide opportunities for students, whether it's work experience and paid internships. And then we've got follow-on actions, which are great to do. So once we've set that minimum standard of what we want our suppliers to do and how we want them to take it forwards, we've got a section on this would be great to do. So this is how they can build on those impacts, perhaps roll it out to more institutions, perhaps work within their sectors and their industries to set an example and use case studies perhaps to show how they've made those positive impacts and how they've increased those positive impacts with our support and the benefits it's brought us. And that works to set a better example to each industry and each sector as to how those positive impacts are received in higher education and how important we take those. So that's a brief overview of the document. Going forwards, it will be available on both of our websites, and you can see what all of those are. You can set your own. It's set out by category, so there's estates, corporate services, labs, ICT and academic services. So you can pick which category you're in. It's got a few base questions in there. But what we would suggest you do, as we will do, is that when you set out your specific procurement, you look at the risks of that specific area. So if it's an estates area, you know there's going to be environmental impacts, but let's look at what those are going to be specifically related to that procurement. So again, with something like in professional services, if we're looking at travel, we know that that's going to have a big environmental impact. So what can we do to mitigate those negative factors? And how can we ask those suppliers to take that forwards and do that on a more ongoing basis, and how we can ask them to improve on it year on year and work within their sector to improve that as an industry standard. So that's where we are with that. I'm going to hand back to, no, I'm going to keep going actually. I'm on the next slide. So Marisol, can we have the next slide? Brilliant, thank you. So this is an update on the SUPC and LUPC responsible procurement groups. Now, historically, we had our own regional responsible procurement groups, but in the spirit of collaboration that we have with SUPC and LUPC, we've decided to combine those groups. So from early 2021, which I think we've set in February, we're going to combine our meetings to bring greater visibility to the projects undertaken. We can strengthen relationships, we can strengthen our networking opportunities and continue to share best practice. So going forwards, hopefully each meeting will have a presentation from a member institution. Now, Marisol and I are hoping that SUPC and LUPC will take turns, but over the life of the group, we will probably balance that out anyway, even if we have them kind of back to back. And we will hope to have a presentation from an external speaker on something related to the topic from that institution. So we'll have, each meeting will have a specific focus. So once we start releasing those, if you have ideas of external speakers, or you have something you want to present as a member institution and a success story that you want to share, we'd be really keen to hear from you. I'm working with both our chairs, which is Christian at LUPC and Sonia at Oxford Brookes. They're both really keen to take this forward as well. And that includes the standard roundtable discussions we have on best practice, looking at current and relevant topics, how everything is undoubtedly for the next few years can be impacted by the pandemic, and things that we've got work in progress. And it may be things like, you know, we hear from Martin and Rob next year to find out how they've picked up their climate emergency from the things that have, you know, stopped them and caused a problem for them now. So the focus of this group will always be to share best practice and help those who are interested, and by supporting with practical advice. You know, guidance is important. We'll look at producing new processes and new practices and looking at relevant subjects. So if there's anything you'd like to see in those meetings, anything you'd like to focus on, or anyone you'd specifically like to hear about, then Marisol and I are open to suggestions. The meetings will be open, and we will encourage conversation and debate. We may even go so far as to look at breakout rooms if we have specific topics we want to cover in more detail. Online breakout rooms, obviously, we don't want to be too close to each other right now. So I think that's everything from me. So I'm going to hand back to Marisol. Thank you.
Thank you, Jane. I think just for the responsible procurement group is that we have now LSC as the first member that is going to be talking. So they will be talking about their sustainability strategy that they launched recently. And we will send details later in the year when we have all our terms of reference finished and everything, so you can join for the first one. That is going to be in February the 4th for now, if nothing changes, but we will send details to all people that attended this group, and you can register to be a member of the group. And I think that's it. I think we can do the questions if there is any questions at the moment.
So I think Emma's going to facilitate these questions for us. So Emma, if I can ask you to take the lead on those.
Absolutely. Yes, I'm
Thank
back.
you.
Hello. Right.
Hello.
We have a few questions. So Marisol, I'm going to ask you for this one first. And it is, how do you keep up to date with changes in regulations and responsible procurement trends? It must be really hard.
Yeah, well, I think my difference with, let's say, Jane, is that I'm focused 100% on responsible procurement. So that gives me more time and more, basically more time to learn about everything and keep investigating about everything. So I know not all institutions have it. But as well, I'm doing a placement with institutions where I work 2 days a week with, this is my second institution, so I've been in LSE and now Natural History Museum. So it's the way of learning how the actual members work, that is very different from consortia in terms of making decisions and the priorities. 2 different institutions. So I think I do have the time to investigate, and I'm involved in all sorts of groups from HIPAA. So I do have a lot of time and resources to actually do. I'm doing the linear from circular economy from the Ellen MacArthur Foundation. There is like a 1 month training. So I do try to keep up to date with the most relevant information. So it is challenging. It changes all the time, but I think we're good too in there.
Thank you, Jayne. Anything to add?
No, I'm just grateful to Marisol that she's dedicated to this full time, and I have 3 pesky frameworks I have to look after. So I very much take the lead from Marisol, and we're really grateful for everything that you do for both of us. So thank you for that.
Brilliant. Jayne, for you, the SDG document contains up to 100 questions for suppliers to answer and for procurement to analyse.
Yeah.
It's quite a task. Is there a light version of the document?
No, there isn't, and I'll tell you for why. Because we don't expect you to ask them all. It's a reference document. It's going to be a kind of a living, breathing document that we will add to over time. So under no circumstances would I suggest you ask suppliers to answer all of those. It contains a number of questions that we thought were relevant. We have scoured the internet. Northeast and Northwest have contributed on this as well. So it covers as many questions as we could think of. Now, obviously, we don't expect you to analyse all of those answers or for you to ask the suppliers for those answers. We put them there as a resource so you can pick the ones that you want. And ones that are specific to the procurement you're undertaking, and ones that are specific to your institution, the ones that are specific to any goals that you have. If you've got an environmental focus or if you've got a social focus, have a look at those questions and pick the ones that are most relevant. I would say probably pick half a dozen. You needn't do any more than that, but it's entirely up to you. If you want to ask all 100, crack on. We'd love to see what the responses are. And as Marisol said, we are working on version 2 already, which we're really pleased about, which has a set of bullet point answers of what we expect those model answers to look like. And some of those may be, you know, a supplier's already on that journey, they've already got a policy and they're already making an improvement plan. It might be that it's a new topic to them and they're working towards it. What it does allow is it does allow suppliers to say, actually, we're not doing a great deal, but we are working towards it. And encouraging that improvement rather than dismissing a supplier because they aren't quite there yet. So it's helping people improve along the way. So don't ask 100 odd questions, pick the ones that you like and pick the ones that are most relevant for you.
Excellent. Marisol, anything to add?
No, it's pretty much that. Like, yeah, the idea is not to ask everything, and there are ones that are very specific to certain areas that say catering, that if you're not doing it, is ask about food and supply chain within food, so you're not going to ask that. So that's why it has that category of where it should have, like if it's state, so catering or ICT. So yeah, we don't expect everyone to ask all 100 questions. That's a lot, and it's 17 goals as well, so it's a lot to take into. But you pick up the ones that are more relevant for your tender and more relevant for your institutions. There are some institutions that focus a lot on equality, for example, so you want to go that way. So yeah, that's pretty much.
Brilliant, thank you. And this is a great question. We seem to be using sustainable procurement and responsible procurement interchangeably. It could be argued they're the same thing. Are we looking to harmonise our approach to terminology across SUPC and LUPC? And Jayne, I'm looking at you here because I think we can maybe talk a little bit about the wider work that we do with the consortia nationally.
Yeah, so as part of the UK UPC, we've got a responsible procurement action group. And one of those things is looking at terminology and having a glossary, because we know there are a lot of terms out there. We know they get used interchangeably. We know they often mean the same thing. Sometimes they have very, very different meanings. There's, you know, slight nuances in the language. So going forwards, responsible procurement is sustainable. You know, if we act responsibly, if we procure responsibly, that will enable sustainability. So I suppose you could say that one is a vehicle to another, and one of them, you know, is the terminology we use to describe it. But I think they are very similar, and I think the UK UPC group that we've got going will decide what that terminology is going forwards, and then we'll stick to it and have a sector-wide approach so we all know where we are. And that's going to be Emma's little task. I say little.
Lucky me.
I say little.
But again, we're working collaboratively. So actually, when we agree on a term, it isn't just us saying this is what it is. It is actually we're all agreed on that. So, Marisol, can you talk a little bit about, or Jayne actually, about what the work is underway with the consortium regarding refinement of calculating Scope 3 carbon emissions for procurement? Big question.
Marisol.
I know there is HIPAA has a dedicated subgroup to look into this, and there's been emails around lately that they're hoping to get some updates before December. So we are waiting. I think we are all waiting for those updates to see how the Scope 3 emissions can be calculated. But once we have something, I think it's something that everyone is looking at. It's so complicated. So as soon as we have something for the sector that the group is working, we will definitely share it.
And I think that works well and truly underway in updating with the HESCET tool, which some of you might be aware of. Yeah. So there's some need to categorise the DEFRA codes back to the HESCET 14 categories, and then it's going to be ready. But it's being pushed towards the end of this year, I believe. But we'll wait for HIPAA to advise us on that one, I think. Reputational risks, how are they covered off in what we do? Jayne.
Ooh, well, I mean, we haven't really covered a great deal of reputational risks because I think it covers so many different areas, and we didn't put it in the SDG questions, and we haven't necessarily put it in the responsible procurement assessment tool either, but it's certainly something we can go away, and perhaps it's one of the topics we pick up at the responsible procurement group, and we have a roundtable discussion as to what people think that means, what the negatives are from it that we can mitigate, what the positives are that we can promote. If there's any sector joined up approaches that the consortia can talk about and maybe bring that out from the UK UPC level. And if institutions have specific individual challenges in their operating community, so if they're in there's very much city locations and there's some other, less densely populated areas. So are there different risks that each institutions face, and how can we measure those and look at those together?
Okay. Great. Marisol, we've got a question on the ISO 2400 standard, and if persons are thinking about utilising that, how does that fit in, and can people use our resources to work towards that? Is it the right way to look at it?
Yes, there's actually so we have in our, I forgot the name, but we have it in our website. It's like a self-assessment. So first of all, we have our assessments publicly available on our website, so you can see very in-depth what they ask and all the things that they measure, all the questions, a very long document. But they also have a self-assessment questionnaire where it's about 40 questions, and it is a good way of start looking into your gaps, the things that you will have to focus when going to be assessed under ISO 2400. So I always suggest that self-assessment questionnaire, because it gives you a really big picture of the areas, and it also compares you with your sector. So you put their education, so it will tell you where are you good, where are you under or over the sector. So I think it's a good one, and I've done it before with some member where sustainability answers or do that self-assessment, and procurement that's like different, and the results are different. So then you will have to come together, sustainability and procurement, to see why you score higher in one or what you think you're doing better, and then procurement thinks that we are not doing that good. So it's a good way to start the conversation between the two of them, that you will need both areas in order to score good and to develop better practices within the ISO 2400.
Right, Jayne, anything to add on that?
No, it's a process that we're looking to undertake. We've downloaded the guidebook, and you know, SUPC are going to look at that. But at the moment, we are a step behind LUPC. We recognise that in terms of that ISO regulation. So at the moment, no, I can't speak as knowledgeably as Marisol. So thank you for that. And if I have anything to update, I'll probably just double check it with Marisol and then update.
Fabulous. Okay, Jayne, over to you on the procurement side. How do you decide what is an ideal weighting to put under sustainability in your tenders, and does it differ, or do you need to consider separately SMEs in the tendering when you're thinking about that?
Yes, absolutely. I would think at framework level we would do a minimum of 10%, and that would be the absolute minimum we would look at, depending on the area in which we're procuring. So within something like professional services, it's got very little, where just services are being delivered third party, there's very little environmental impact, for example, so it doesn't have such a great weighting. Now something like estates, or in the catering area or ICT, then it probably needs a higher weighting, because there's physical and goods supply chains involved, and there's obviously then people in those manufacturing supply chains, so it probably needs a heavier weighting. And was the question about, are they SME friendly? Potentially,
yeah. And how would you differ or alter your question to ensure that they're SME friendly?
Okay, so as an example, this cropped up in the temp agency, temp and permanent recruitment tender, and I got shopped to the Cabinet Office mystery shopper. So I said that every supplier who was going to come onto our framework had to have a modern slavery statement regardless of their turnover. And one of the SMEs complained that it wasn't inclusive. And at the time, the way I'd worded the question, they were probably right, actually. I demanded a statement but hadn't given them any guidance. So we rewrote the question and said, we'd like you to have a modern slavery statement regardless of your turnover, and we're prepared to help you do it. We'll give you the guidance, we'll give you the tools to do it. And that was okay with the Cabinet Office, and the question went through. And as it was, we then worked with our SMEs and we brought them up to standard, and they've got modern slavery statements in place. So yes, I think some of the things that we ask in sustainability could be deemed unfair and put off SMEs. So I think we need to think really carefully, if we are going to ask for a certain standard, whether it's a modern slavery statement or an ISO, that we look at what the alternatives are, or we really assess what their action plans are and what their feasibility is for having a statement or a policy or a process in place, and measure it on merit, not just a rubber stamp at the end of the day that yes, they've got a statement, or yes, they've got a policy, and yes, they've got their ISO. What have they really done, and is it meaningful? And that's not to say we lower our standards. That's to say we work with SMEs who may not have the ability financially or resource wise to come up to the standard of the big companies that we know that have got whole teams doing that all day, every day, along with bid writers as well. So I think we need to be more careful how we evaluate and the guidance that we offer to get those suppliers up to that standard.
Right. Marisol, anything else on SMEs particularly?
No, I think cover it all.
Okay. Somebody's asked, and this is a really good question because we all do similar work across the sector, is there a mechanism for sharing supplier responses with members so that suppliers don't get fatigued by being asked the same question over and over? So I think this is an area to explore. I'm not sure that we have anything specific at the moment. Marisol, do you want to just talk a little bit about Sustain and how we're thinking about that from a consortia perspective?
Yeah, well, the idea with Sustain is that at tender stage, we're not going to ask many questions. I mean, it's going to have specific areas that are for that tender, but we want to use Sustain to assess suppliers. And the idea is that if we use a supplier, at the moment is the Scottish Consortium and us, but if I assess a supplier, it's going to be there, and everyone can at least see the responses and evaluate the same way without having to do it again. So that's pretty much what we want to do. It's about 40 questions we've been reducing it a lot from this first Sustain tool that the Scottish had. So yeah, I mean, we start already assessing some suppliers, so we'll see how it goes with that one. But the idea is exactly that, to stop duplicating efforts and trying to get the same resources, and is going to assess the sustained code of conduct that a few institutions, well, consortia have already looked into. So that is the way we're trying to avoid that.
Okay. Jayne, anything to add?
No, I think Marisol's made some really good points, and I think it's a really good idea so that the suppliers don't get fatigued answering the same questions. And so I think if we do have somewhere central, we can record some of the responses. But I also think that if we ask, you know, the same supplier the same question a year later, they may have improved, so they may not want their original response taken into account. So it, you know, we need to have a mechanism of doing that, and we also need to be careful of the information we share that the suppliers might have told us in confidence and how we put that in the public domain. So I think it's a really valid question, and I think it's really, you know, it ties back into the age-old debate around the SQ and how many times they're going to fill that in. So I think there's some work to be done around it. I don't think we should necessarily dismiss it out of hand. I think there should be a mechanism for them to record their responses, but I also think we should be able to give them the opportunity to update and improve and tell the story of what they've done.
Brilliant. And I think as well, this is something that could be discussed at regional and national responsible procurement groups about how universities can work together. If you're procuring similar items or covering a similar project, it may be that you can actually collaborate on that more effectively than we can do using the government guidelines. So the last ones are really about the use of consultants overall. And we all know that we have lots to learn when it comes to sustainable or responsible procurement, and there are various consultants that will do various things for us. So question really about how do we work with consultants effectively, and are consortia doing anything, or can we consider doing something where we might join up use of these on particular projects? Jayne, sorry.
I think it's quite a grey area. As you say, there's a lot of consultants that do a lot of things, particularly in the sustainability and responsible procurement space, because it has come to the fore quite quickly. So I think the worry is you have a consultant who's just cashing in on trend and they don't know what they're talking about. So I think there's a lot of information sharing that we need to do around that. I think we've got a fair few partners within the sector who look after different areas. So I think we need to be mindful of how many people, you know, we do have on board as consultants, or who we use and why we're using them, and are they bringing any value, or is there something that somebody else has done in the sector which covers it? You know, are there lessons learned within the sector that we can share, that we don't have to go out and do consultants, and bring consultants on board? And I think it probably depends what kind of consultants we're using and what they're going to actually do, because there's so many out there, and you know, you want to have an industry expert, and you know, it's such a big area, and so many different consultants do so many different things. I think it's impossible to say really conclusively what we can tell you to do on that.
Okay. Marisol, do you want to talk at all about using academics as well? I know that you've got some good links with Greenwich University, and actually a lot of us have some great resource in our own organisations. Have you got any experience on that?
Yeah, I think sometimes when organization looks into consultancy, they don't realize that there is research already going on within their institutions that they can get without having to pay a consultancy. There is, as Jayne said, there is so many areas in responsible procurement, sustainability, and is in trend in a lot of areas. So one of the things that they can do is look into their research, and a few of our institutions are really big in environment, sustainability, and looking into those projects. So I think that's a good way to start and engage with your own academics. That's one. And in terms of consultancy, I think that's something we can look into when we have our joint responsible procurement group, and maybe areas, and look into consultancy. But as Jayne says, we have to be careful who we endorse in, because it's there's a lot out there. So we don't want as well to put supplier members to keep paying for consultancy when they can do it their own, or get other in the sector that are already doing most of the things out there. So
I think following up on that point, Marisol, and you highlighting academics, Emma, I don't think we should necessarily restrict it to academics. We need to look at our whole institutions, because we had Martin from Bristol this morning, and he has an absolute wealth of knowledge of the things that they've looked at and the processes they've been through and things they've rolled out. So while there is great work that academics can do, you know, I think we really need to tap into people outside of procurement, but within our institutions, and grow those relationships and get the conversation started with them, and then we can share that with the rest of our networks a lot better. The knowledge is invariably always out there. It's just accessing it.
Yeah, absolutely right. And Marisol, you mentioned the responsible procurement group, and maybe this being a topic that we could discuss. How do people get involved with that responsible procurement group? When will we be sharing some information?
Yeah, we'll be sharing more details. I have to talk with probably Susan, which she doesn't know yet, but I will. It's just to see which is the quickest way and better way to join, to ask people to register, to keep now that I used to do it very manually, but it's a small group, but now it's going to be both of us having details from both institutions. So we'll have to see how to do that. We'll already share information, but we want to give a clear, like what they will expect. So it's basically finishing the terms of reference from one side, and see how we are going to register attendees and so on, more logistics. But I guess that's going to be by the end of this year.
Okay.
Thinking that we're going to have the first one in February.
Okay.
It will probably be a similar format to this, but will allow people to talk and show their faces, because it is an interactive group after all. So something like this.
But we want to record presentations from attendees, with just presentations. So 10, 15, 20 minutes, however is going to be the presentation, and then just to have it there so the people can refer later on. And then the meeting is going to be not recorded. It's going to be just free for everyone to talk and express their opinions without having to be recorded.
Great. Okay, we're coming to the end of time. There was one more question with regards to SUPC and electronics watch. I'm going to take that one offline, because I think there's some wider bits to it and wider discussions. So just want to make sure we get all of the information right on that before we answer that one. Thank you so much, Jayne and Marisol, for today. That was really useful. I hope our delegates found that really helpful. All of the information is on our websites. We've LUPC and SUPC both have responsible procurement sections with all this detail on there. And I know that both Marisol and Jayne will be more than happy to answer any questions that you have on any aspect of today or any work that you want to do. As Marisol said, more information will be shared on the responsible procurement group shortly. So we'll share that with you. You will receive a lovely survey from us in the next few days asking what you thought of this session and all of the sessions today, and your feedback is really welcomed, because it enables us to do things better every time. So if you could just take 5 minutes to complete that when you get it, that would be great. Otherwise, thank you very much for participating. Thank you for all your questions, and have a great day.